Hello card fighters, this is Vanguard Messiah here with my deck profile for my Messiah deck for the premium format. To start off with is just a basic starter that gives me a quick shield if I go second. And this deck, it's a pretty good tool to have, so whether I'm searching my grade 3s, if I need to put it down as a lock card, which actually does work that way, just to give myself extra resources. And I can still keep it a guard, just because I have ways of bringing my cards back. The other grade 0 that I'm running with this, aside from triggers, is Neon Messiah or Arion. Because this deck is main grade 3s are only going to be Messiahs, this is a good card to have whenever it's been unlocked, so it can just be unlocked at the end of the turn or through one of my card effects. As long as it's on my turn, I can shove it into the soul, draw a card, and I can give a unit plus 5,000 power. So it's a pretty good little tech resource that I run. And in a lot of games that I played, it actually does help quite a bit, because this deck does go through soul pretty fast, and it's a pretty good utility to have. Going into my grade 1s, a grade 1 that actually has pretty good use is for Prism Gate Starvader Palladian. When he's rode upon, you can call him to rearguard, so he's always a pretty good right target to have, and it gives you little extra resources to your board. And his other effect, whenever your opponent's card is unlocked, so this comes down to either maybe an opponent's card gets unlocked by one of my effects, or if a card is unlocked at the end of their turn, or if they somehow flip it face up by one of their own card effects, that actually does count as unlocking the card, so I actually can proc the effect. For a Counterblast and a Retire, he has to put the top card of my opponent's deck into a rearguard circle that isn't occupied. So in case your opponent thinks they're done with their cards getting locked, he just gives you good resources, and depending on the matchup and what strides you go into, it can be a pretty good resource to have. Since I have a good number of grade 3s that I want to search, Lady Battle of the White Dwarf is pretty ideal. Just like any grade 3 searcher, whenever she's placed from hand, look at the top 5, get a grade 3 at your hand, and then discard one. And her plus 5 comes from as long as there is a face down card on anyone's circles or in the bind zone. So if an opponent's Vanguard is deleted, if they have a lock card, if I have a lock card, or if my opponent has a bind zone, then, or if my bind zone has a face down card, she will gain plus 5. So she's a pretty good 13k beater or a 13k booster. And it's always good to have nice numbers without really needing to try. And for my last card, which this is a bit of a flexible spot, Manipulator of the Void. She's pretty good because she works on Vanguard or Rearguard. So when she battles or when she attacks or boosts, if the attack hits, lock a card from my deck. Lock a card from my hand to rearguard and then draw a card. So it becomes a very good utility, and most cases people will probably guard this, but that's pretty good pressure because they don't know what I'm gonna lock down from my hand. It could be a pretty big unit, or maybe something that can give me a bigger setup. But either way, you can run instead maybe a Cauldron Wing, maybe a Jet Shaft, any card that helps whatever game plan you like. You can swap her out pretty easily for something else. So overall, these are the grade 1s that I chose to run for this deck. Moving on to the grade 2s, since the Messiah deck, everyone knows her, everyone hopefully loves her. Lady Fencer of Matter Transmission. For her effect, and this is always going to be active once I'm on my grade 3s, When she swings, for having Messiah Vanguard, she gives 5,000 power, and at the end of the battle, she has to lock herself. Just on her own, even if there isn't a Force 1 or Force 2 on her, she by herself can still hit a Vanguard that hasn't got any triggers. Of course, it's an easy guard, but it's a lock that you can't really interrupt, except for a G-Guard. And hey, if my opponent uses a G-Guard and gets rid of it early on, that doesn't hurt me as much because they wasted a G-Guard on a 15k swing. For this card, Lady Battler of the Black Dwarf, since recently promos did come to the US, having for her specifically for this build is really useful. Her Vanguard effect is simple. When you ride a Grade 3 Messiah on top of her, search your deck for any other Messiah Grade 3 as long as it has a different name. Just being able to search for whatever target you needed based on the situation, or maybe you're missing a piece you really needed. Being able to search for whatever you want is really good utility. And then her rearguard effect. After she battles, depending if she's been locked or she's been unlocked or she hasn't, two effects happen. If she hasn't been unlocked yet, you get to lock her, and if after she swings she has been unlocked, for a counterblast you get to retire and draw 2 cards. So she's really good at adding pressure and giving your game, being able to be both an offensive and defensive tool. It's a really good card to have. And for the last two, I debated a few options, and I was thinking, what could be a good card that might not eat into my resources? And I ended up finding this. Black Bullet of Iron Star Photosphere. This card, it's an old card, but first things first. Being a 9k, you want to be careful. If you happen to ride this, Excel and Protect the decks can easily swing into it. So just keep that in mind if you choose to ride this card. But on Rearguard on GB1, on his attack, his cost when you are on a Messiah Vanguard, lock a card from your hand to a Rearguard circle, and he gains 9,000 power. So he's a really good utility card that doesn't cost a counterblast. So if you were to use, let's say instead Gaster, even though it is a 10k base, you have to wait until after the battle, but he does it right when you swing. So being able to get certain pieces that you want is pretty good. Plus, there's a little niche thing that I'll show a little bit later if you haven't picked up on it already. The on attack is very important, so this is a card that you don't want to sleep on because you can actually hit pretty decent numbers just with this, a Force 1, and if you had any other effects that gave it power. Now, moving on to the Grade 3s. The main star of the show is for Alter Ego Messiah. He is the only card that's going to generate you force markers, so in this deck you're going to swing pretty high numbers already, so you don't necessarily need to rely on it, but it's always good to add on pressure. Most cases, I'll usually go for Force 1, so that way even if I don't have a booster, even my Lady Battler, Black Dwarf can still threaten for a damage. And if I want to add a different type of pressure, I can always go Force 2 on the Vanguard, because usually in a lot of cases my Vanguard swing ends up being the weakest. So having a simple critical on top of it can add extra pressure that the opponent does not usually like to deal with. And when you ride into Alter Ego, once you go into Lady Battler of the Black Dwarf, here are your two other options. You have between 2 Alter Ego Neo Messiah and 2 Ideal Ego Messiah. Both of these serve different utilities. Starting off with Alter Ego Neo Messiah, he has two really good Vanguard effects. And both of these, for most cases, are free. When you're on Alter Ego Neo, when you stride, keep in mind, a Messiah G unit. So you can't, any of the new stuff that you've seen in Premium Collection and other sets, if you were to ride on top of him, you won't get the stride skill. However, you would still be able to get his GB2. Depends on what you ride. When you, at the end of turn, if you have unlocked a unit by one of your card effects, for a single Soul Blast, he gets to draw you too. So, having Alter Ego Neo with whatever Messiah stride you're on, along with Black Dwarf, can give you a really simple draw engine. So after you've even, let's say you go on Cosmic Dawn, any Messiah stride, that gives you an easy +4 to your hand, not including other effects and not including drive checks. So those 2 to 4 extra cards can be really useful in keeping you alive in the game. And for the other side of the coin, Ideal Ego Messiah. On Vanguard, he's got a really interesting effect, and keep in mind for Ideal, both his effects are not GB restricted. So for his first effect, when he's placed on Vanguard or you stride on top of him, does not matter which stride, lock a card from your hand to rearguard. And the reason why I don't say call is because every effect that brings a card from your hand or somewhere else on the field, somewhere else to a rearguard as a lock card, it is not considered calling. So something like being under Ghidorah would not affect you in the slightest. Or maybe some other effect only allowed you to call from certain areas. Locking a card from hand bypasses all of it. And his other effect, as long as you're on a grade 3 Messiah as long as you're on a Messiah Vanguard, after he battles for a Soul Blast, he locks himself, and looking at the top 3 cards of your deck, you get to lock up to another card from those 3. So he's really good at helping you building boards. So if there's certain pieces you haven't seen, you have a little bit of a Gold Paladin splash to help with anything you might be missing. Or you can choose not to put down anything if you don't like what you see. And his effect alone is not once per turn. Plus, if he unlocks, the effect resets, so you get to use it multiple times. So it's always something good to keep in mind. Before I go into strides, let's go into the deck's only main grade 4. Big Trucky Boy himself, Genesis Machine Deity Volkagode. As a reminder, you are not allowed to ride him, and if you call him by an effect, and if you simply call him to rearguard circle, he gets retired. Because you have so many effects that lock cards from other spots and bring him back, it's very easy to get him out. And let me backtrack a little bit, because I completely forgot to mention, but usually because this is a premium deck, it didn't immediately click to me to actually mention Alter Ego skills. For a single Soul Blast, you get to bring back 2 cards from your drop with different names, put them down as lock cards, and on his swing, unlock as many cards as you want, and each of those units get +10. So even if you have me going first, you can have a pretty good unit. You have pretty good units to choose from, and Volkagode, being a 30,000 power base, he's the second highest number, tied with Dragon Deity of Destruction Gizeh, and those two are only tied and only behind tied for Valkyrian at 70,000. But being a grade 4, you can constantly have out, and if you're lucky enough to get him out early, it's just a big beat stick they have to deal with early when they don't have a lot of shield. And with Alter Ego, when you use a skill, plus 10 on a Vocal Goad, swinging for 40 without really trying, it's pretty strong. And now for Vocal Goad's other effects. After he battles, for his cost, he gets to lock himself to give another unit plus 10,000 power. So even if you're not going into Force 1, you still have ways of giving that power while having a unit that has critical. Or have a unit gain plus 20,000 power, so along with Force 1. So it's pretty good utility to have. It's hard for columns to just easily swing into it when they know they're better off swinging at the Vanguard, considering Vocal Goad can't intercept. He has no shield value. And now moving on to the strides. The way I have this G-Zone built, it actually feels a lot more comfortable using each and every one of the strides in this G-Zone. And to start off, let's go with the newest card in the bunch. 2 Nebula Dragon, Cosmic Dawn Dragon. My god, when they revealed this card, every Link Joker player loves it. The ratios that someone plays could differ. I'm considering a build where I might cut this down to 1. But there's other builds where if you don't have many options, you can always have him 4. He's always going to be a good genie to run with. When he attacks, for only a counterblast, so keep in mind, he will not help you get to GB2 right away, so not necessarily the best piece to combo with Alter Ego Neo, but later down the line, if you use him a little later, he can help you with that. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, Gold Paladin again, and choose up to 2 of those cards from your hand and lock them to rearguard circles. They don't have to be open, you can call them over units that have already attacked and are unlocked. And then for every lock card you control, you can decide. Do you want them back to hand? You want each one back to hand? Do you want some unlocked? Do you want them all unlocked? Or do you want a mix of both? If you unlock them, you have units that can give you more attacks. Or if you want to be more defensive, get those lock cards back to your hand, refill your hand size, and make your opponent lock the same number of cards that you put back to hand. So imagine searching Vocal Goad, and if you were playing this with a deleter, imagine you fetch a Given. So that can string into easy potential kills. But the fact that this card works with any Link Joker deck you want. If you want, you can mix in Chaos and Brant. You can mix in Glendios and Brant. You can mix it with Tanra. Any Grade 3 wacky rogue mix that you want to try. This card is a perfect stride to run with. And just before I move on to the next one, so imagine if I search, imagine if at the top 5 I get Neon Messiah Arion, and instead of deciding to put him back to hand, I decide to unlock him, because every single grade 3 I have as a Messiah, he will be able to go in the soul, draw you a card, and give something +5. So, in case you're low on soul after swinging with multiple Ideal Eagle Messiahs, he's a good card to help you get your soul refunded. Playing as a one-of is Nebula Dragon, Baryon Dragon. Here's a little advertisement for it. Have you ever gone against any decks that just love to spam markers, like Luard, Davos, Narukami, that pesky Pale Moon player that just loves to spam 3 to 4 Excel markers, or that Ripple player that, now that Odysseus is gone, won't be as much of trouble, but before, when you had to deal with multiple markers, and you didn't think you had a chance if you somehow survived. For his simple skill of flipping up a G unit, he will tear and rip apart every single marker your opponent has on their field and their hands. For every single marker removed, he gains 10,000 power and a critical. And the juiciest example of this is if you're somehow lucky enough to go against 7 Cs, the V version, and they just happen to have a buttload of treasure markers. Imagine if their whole field is full of them, along with maybe 1 or 2 protect markers. You can potentially gain 80,000 power and 8 critical. Obviously, it's not more likely going to happen, but you can probably rip apart 2 to maybe 4 markers, depending on the deck you go against. So he's a really good comeback card, but in case you're going against a deck that doesn't really have any markers for you to destroy, he can just simply be used as flip fodder. So even just having one of them, putting it down at the right time, can help you survive games. And especially if you're going against a deck that has multiple Vanguard swings, potentially with a Force 2. Removing that Force 2 can help keep you in the game. And now, for this utility card, he's actually the card I've been using the least, but he is not a bad stride to go into if you want to slow down your opponent a little bit. Death Star Vader Glue Ball Avalanche. The reason why I run 2 of them is for his first skill. If these 2 are face up in your G zone, every card that your opponent has locked, instead of being unlocked, would get bound face down instead. So this is a good way for your opponent. This is a good way to stall your opponent a little bit. And his other effect, for Soul Blast and flipping anything you want face up. So he can flip up some of your other strides to help set up for other plays. You can choose 2 of your opponent's units, lock them, and then your whole front row gets 2,000 power for every card that is face down, every lock card, and every face down card that's bound. So this is a pretty simple card that if you want to set up with just him, your other strides can help lock down the board a little more, and your opponent would not be getting those cards back. Even if they have an effect that just flips them up, they would instead get bound. But keep in mind, when their turn ends and those cards get bound, those circles are free. So you want to make sure you're timing this the best case you can. And if you want, you flip something else, and you can use them again for a second time if you want to. Now, going in this particular order, the card I tend to flip over the most, Genesis Dragon Harmonix Neo Messiah. His skill is a GB3, so it's a little bit slower to pull off, but it's a really good one. On his swing, flipping up any unit you want, and you have to be on a Messiah Heart, so you're fine there. Unlock all cards on the field. For every card that was unlocked, he'll gain 5,000 power, and all units that you unlock, they also gain 5,000 power. So he's a really good board bump. He's a really good board presence. And the other thing, if you were able to unlock 5 or more cards, this is where having cards like Photosphere, ideally Messiah, and even Palladian can help you achieve the 5 you want. And also using Alter Ego Neo. He gains a guard restrict your opponent cannot guard with cards that are grade 1 or greater. So if they're using old cards that, for specific reasons, that kind of shuts them off. And for even against, let's say, Dimension Police, if they have a lot of grade 3s they think they can guard with, that gets shut down. G-guards are still useful, and higher shield value doesn't make this card as strong. So a lot of times he does just get flipped up, but on occasion, if your board is somehow set with all of your lock cards, he's a really good card to just slap down and come back, because he doesn't cost a Soul Blast, doesn't cost a Counter Blast. You just have to be at GB3. Next up for the Messiah lineup, 2 Genesis Dragon Basaltus Messiah. Arguably the best stride to start with if you're going second and you went into Alter Ego Neo. For his skill, on swing, Counterblast 1 and flip another copy that has the same name. So, little old strategy. If you were on Harmonix Messiah and you have the old Harmonix Messiah in your G zone, you could actually flip that up instead to proc the effect. For every face-up card in your G zone, choose a lock card and an unlock card, and you can decide if you want them to be locked or unlocked. If you unlock one card, draw a card. So Basaltis, combining Basaltis with uh, Neo Messiah Arion, along with Alter Ego Neo Messiah, along with Lady Bat of the Black Dwarf, you can already see is gonna net you one from his skill, one from his skill, two from her skill if you unlock an attack afterwards, and then at the end phase on two, you're already netting 9 cards to hand for pretty much 2 counterblasts and a soul blast. That adding on to the potential draws you get, it's a pretty good unit to start off with, even just on GB1, even just your first stride. And if you choose to not use him right away, use him later, he just gets to lock and unlock more cards. So he's an even more deadly presence. However, if you're going against cards that somehow make their whole board resist, you can't really do anything about that. So, let's do something about it. Genesis Dragon Transel's Messiah. Now, he has to be GB2, so you can't use him right away, unless you're G-Guard. But his skill, and this is the funny part, on his counterblast and flip a copy of himself, lock every single unit on the board from all fighters. Resist cannot stop this. Everything gets hit. And any cards that did not get locked will get unlocked. So a lot of your G guards tend to lock your own cards. So you can potentially have your whole board locked before you slap this down. And then when you bring them down, you just unlock them all while restricting your opponent. It's a pretty good unit to have. Keep in mind though, he doesn't get any potential crit, extra power, or draw. He just says, flip the table. Literally. And now, the last of the Messiah package, and this is a card where your opponent's hand size really will not matter because you're going to be drawing a lot. And they're going to have to try to kill you before they're down to 5 cards in hand and deck. Genesis Dragon Integral Messiah. I'm going to mention his other effect first, not the one that most people might or might not be aware of. When he attacks for a counterblast and flipping something you want face up, so it can be anything you want. To unlock every card you have, and if you've unlocked 3, soul charge first, draw a card after, and then plus 10,000 power. So that gives you good pressure, but the more important effect is his other effect. When you have 3 Messiah G units face up in your G zone, when he pops out, you, and the tornado warning, I guess, you and your opponent shuffle your entire hands into your deck and draw 5 cards. Little story with this card. I played against, I forgot his name, but he was over at Kingslayer. Kingslayer cards, really good card shop, by the way. Self plug. I forgot if he was playing Narukami or Tachikaze. We ended up getting to the point where I had 3 cards left in deck. 3 cards left in hand and deck total. And he had 4 cards in hand and 1 card left in deck. I brought this down, and because the effect was active, we both shuffled, and we both, after resolution of skill, decked out at the same time. So I thought it ended up being a double draw. But the way a double deck out works, the player who initiated the skill actually wins. So just because this card exists, your opponent has a time limit of trying to kill you before they're down to 5 cards in hand. So as you can see, just having on a time limit, having a lot of draw to be able to tank a lot of your either your attacks or your defenses. They have to try to kill you fast enough, because Messiah thrives in the long game. And the way this deck is built, it has a pretty good draw engine, and this, if you have a large hand size and you don't want to deck yourself out, going into him shuffles your hand back. So if you had upwards of 10 to 12 to 15 cards, and you somehow got through while keeping that hand size, all of that goes back to your hand. So imagine if you have perfect guards, if you have perfect guards, G guards, heal guardians, crits, any other units, and if you go on Alter Ego Neo or Ideal Ego, you get to put down a card first before you shuffle everything back. So it's a really strong effect that if people do not pay attention to, they will end up losing just by deck out before their turn happens. On to the G guards. Large wheel the Cosmo Reef. For a simple counterblast, your opponent has to lock a card in their back row, and if it happens, he'll get 5,000 shield. So it's a little more shield than your heal guardian, so that's nice to have. But by locking a card, you can potentially cut off a booster mid-battle, or cut off another back row that then they can't really swing with. Because every grade 3 you have is a Messiah, Light that seals the tier Lady Healer. For a single Soul Blast, as long as there's a lock card anywhere, she gets plus 5,000 shield, but because if you're also on a Messiah Vanguard when that happens, she gets another 5,000 shield. So for a single Soul Blast to be at 10,000, it's pretty good. Next up are one of our better G guards. Darkness that lights up Demise, Lacus Karina. She is the G Guardian that does flip another one, but you have to be at GB1 already in order to use her. Lock up to 3 of your own rear guards, doesn't matter if they're front row or back row, and your opponent has to lock the same number of their back row. So any big setups that they might have could potentially be cut off just because of this card. But like with any G-Guard or any Stride, it's all about timing. And lastly, from the newest premium collection, Terminal Ending Darkness Big Ripper. For his effect, for a single Soul Blast, you can lock any number and lock as many back row rear guards as you want from your side. Because if this could lock as many of my opponents, my choice would have been so much better. But you only can target yours. He gets 10,000 shield. But the better part, if your opponent, if you have two more lock cards, so I could still lock one rear guard, and if there was already another rear guard that was locked, that already gives me the 2 I need to get an extra draw. So in terms of defense, this card is actually one of the better ones, just because there is the only setup you have to have is just have back row units, but sometimes you might not have it, so you want to make sure you set up your boards accordingly. And to finish it off, my trigger lineup. I mean, as everyone knows, although everyone hates it, it's a necessity until Bushi decides to ban it in premium. Star Dragon Deity of Infinitude Elder Breath. As everyone knows, in terms of over triggers, being able to remove itself so you don't immediately die, giving 100,000 power, 100 million power, which everyone can agree is way too big of a number to be able to guard defensively, or to be able to attack into offensively. But if your opponent happens to get their over trigger, this is one of the stronger ones that helps break through it. Its additional effect is doubling the power and critical of your front row. So those those vocal goads, those vocal goads that are 30k, or might be 40 with Force 1, or even got a boost. in some way. They're already swinging on their own for 60 to 80,000 with 2 critical, or if you even have one of them on force 2 with 4 critical. So that card alone just steals games. And if we want to do a quick comparison to all over triggers, not counting Lyrical and Shaman King because we're talking about premium here, Elder Breath is one of the higher rated ones. On Montoya, the Cater over trigger, although it does give drive checks to your rear guards, if you're unlucky in your timing, it really won't do much of anything. Dragon Empire over trigger, Drag Veda. Reset in the Vanguard is pretty strong, but it won't offer much of anything else. But usually people who build their deck around it will maximize how much they can do with it, just like with any overtrigger. Bless Favor, the one for Stoicheia, is an overall good unit, and it's not really bad to see it at any point in the game. Going from essentially getting from the additional effect, getting basically 2 draws. Your front row gets power. A unit gets a critical, and you also can heal damage. It's a really good tipping point that can help swing games. Galagameld, the Dark States Overtrigger, is really strong if you hit it early, because it's a constant 10,000 power and extra critical that your opponent has to deal with every turn. Early game, it's really annoying to deal with, but any point past that, it's not as strong because you have higher shield value. You probably have higher shield. You'll have different ways of dealing with it. But the little thing is, not a single overtrigger, aside from the Shaman King one, can kill as early as Elder Breath can. If you have a simple 3-card board, that if your opponent somehow is unlucky and they do not have as many, if they do not have as many shield to deal with, imagine I swing with this board, and I pop the overtrigger. I can give the 100 million here, I draw a card, and then this doubling to 60 and this being at 200 million and 20. And if your opponent decides to not guard this, which more than likely they probably won't, or if they do, this automatically doubles to 20 anyway, so... And each one would hit for 2 criticals, so... Just this board alone, simple, basic board, if your opponent does not have the shield for it, can already kill. And keep in mind, after this swings, locks itself, gives another 10,000 power if for some reason. And keep in mind, let's say they somehow, even if they got lucky and they did hit their own overtrigger defensively, this attack still can't be guarded. Obviously, unless you have a PG or you have your own heal guardian to minus the critical. But on turn 2, that's already an easy kill before any strategy gets built up. I'm in full agreement that the overtrigger, at least in premium, needs to be banned. Needs to be removed. And at least give us something that is equivalent in terms of luck, but not as salty that the game just ends just because of an overtrigger. And I've had games that an overtrigger has saved me. I've had games where I've gotten sacked by someone else's overtrigger. So I understand both sides of the argument of whether it stays or leaves, but in premium, I'm in full agreement it has to leave. And just to round it off, for the grade 3 searcher, for the stride crit, 3 of the crit that goes into soul, draw a card and gives 10,000 power. 4 draw trigger, just because there are numbers that the crit sentinel won't be able to deal with, so having the draw trigger is more important, plus it helps to draw in pieces. And our clan's heal guardian, which, as you know, plus 10 to your Vanguard, plus 10 to your Vanguard, I believe. Yep, or you can give an opponent's unit minus 2 critical. So early on, using a heal guard just to keep yourself alive with low damage is pretty good. And that right there, everybody, was my deck profile, and I even went a little more in depth. And hopefully you guys learn a few things or two. Oh, the little interaction with our grade 2. And oh my god, I actually just noticed this. Glue Ridge and Photosphere are basically cousins. Style similar. But what you can do with Photosphere, just to show it really quickly, on his attack, when you activate to lock a card, let's say I wanted to lock we'll go here. I can actually lock him on top of my mid-battle attacking Photosphere. So this cannot be interrupted by a G-Guard, and I can get a lock to further any plays that I want. This has been Vanguard Messiah, and hopefully you guys learned quite a bit. Signing out.